The Robert Eggers Nosferatu remake is a good movie. I mean, you might disagree. I don't know. I liked it. I thought it was pretty good. And it got me thinking about what is the difference between a good movie remake that is actually worth watching versus a bad movie remake where you should probably just skip it and watch the original instead. I see a lot of people criticizing modern Hollywood, saying that they rely way too heavily on remakes and legacy sequels and stuff like that. And a lot of people find this to be very creatively bankrupt, kind of unoriginal. And while I definitely do understand the sentiment, because let's face it, Hollywood has definitely sort of fallen back on the remake crutch in the past, 10, 15 years. The simple fact of the matter is that Hollywood has always been doing this, and if you really look at a lot of the movie remakes that have come out over the history of cinema, some of the best movies of all time were actually remakes. John Carpenter's The Thing, a classic sci-fi horror movie, remake. Brian De Palma's Scarface, one of the most iconic Al Pacino characters, remake. Scorsese's The Departed, a remake of Internal Affairs. Scorsese's Cape Fear, also a remake. The 1959 Ben-Hur, really the only Ben-Hur movie that most people even care about, remake. And even The Wizard of Oz from 1939 was a remake of another Wizard of Oz movie that came out in 1925. You have The Fly, The Blob, remakes. And even Adam Sandler's The Longest Yard, a movie that I loved as a kid. I don't know how much it would still really hold up, but it's a remake. So clearly Hollywood has been making movie remakes pretty much as long as Hollywood has existed. And a lot of them are really great movies, classics that pretty much everyone loves. But at the same time, we also know of many different remakes that give remakes a bad rap in the first place. I'm looking at you, Disney live action remakes. So what exactly separates these two different categories of remakes? The ones that are actually really great movies and the ones that are creatively bankrupt slop that you should just skip and watch the original. Well, number one, I think there actually has to be a legitimate reason for the remake to exist in the first place. It has to bring something new to the table that you couldn't just get by watching the original. And I think Robert Eggers' Nosferatu remake is a really good example of this. And to be fair, I would still probably put The Lighthouse as my favorite Robert Eggers movie. There's just something about those unhinged Willem Dafoe nautical monologues that really speaks to me. I love that movie, but really I think Nosferatu is right up there with some of the best films he's made, and honestly all of his films are great. He's 4 for 4 in my books. And in the case of Nosferatu, I think that Robert Eggers actually did have a very compelling reason to remake the original, which is that the original version is a silent film. And nothing against silent films, a lot of people actually think that Hollywood peaked in the silent era, but if you ask me, silent films and talkies, I guess you would call it, are pretty much different mediums altogether. I mean, obviously it's still film, it's still cinema, but they aren't necessarily the exact same medium in my opinion. The addition of sound and dialogue completely changes the way that you approach making a film. So just off that in and of itself, I think it's a very compelling reason to remake the original version, because it's a new medium. It'd be like adapting a book into a movie. In this case, it's remaking a silent film into a modern talkie. And full disclosure, I have not seen any of the other Nosferatu remakes. I know that Werner Herzog also did a Nosferatu remake. I haven't seen that one, so I'm not really 100% sure whether or not Robert Eggers really did that much different compared to the Herzog Nosferatu. But if I'm just comparing it to the original version, I think it is pretty safe to say the fact that it's a talkie automatically is going to make it a fundamentally different film than the original, which I think that's a very compelling reason alone to do a Nosferatu remake. And another thing that Robert Eggers' Nosferatu remake brought to the table was Lily Rose Depp's performance. Now, while I was watching the movie, I was actually thinking she definitely must have studied Isabelle Adjani's performance from the movie Possession from 1982. If you've seen that movie, you would definitely know what I'm talking about. It's basically a character who's completely possessed, and the acting performance is almost over the top. Definitely some people aren't gonna like it. It's definitely gonna be one of those performances where you're either super impressed with it or you just find it so over the top that it's kind of comical and unbelievable. Personally, I love Possession, and I thought Isabelle Adjani's performance was amazing in that movie. I kind of liked the over-the-top acting in it, and I thought Lily Rose Depp did an absolutely amazing job capturing a very similar type of performance. And I think that acting performance and bringing sort of that possession influence into the movie absolutely added something new to the Nosferatu movie. If you watch the original version, great movie for sure, but adding Lily Rose Depp's performance in this movie definitely changed the experience of watching the movie quite a bit. And you can also look to other recent examples. For example, Denis Villeneuve's Dune movies. Now, I don't know if you would really count these as remakes, because if you look compared to the 1984 David Lynch Dune adaptation, I wouldn't really say that Denis Villeneuve's Dune movies are a remake of those. They're both just adaptations of the same book, but that's kind of just semantics. The point I want to bring up here is that there is a compelling reason for Denis Villeneuve to adapt the Dune books, just based on the fact that David Lynch's Dune wasn't really that good of an adaptation of the book. And look, I love David Lynch. He's one of my favorite directors of all time. And a lot of people absolutely love the 1984 Dune movie. But when it comes to actually adapting the book and bringing Frank Herbert's vision to the screen, I don't really think that David Lynch quite did it justice, and I think Denis Villeneuve really wanted to respect the themes of the original book, so that right there is a very compelling reason to do a Dune remake, if you want to call it that. And in all fairness to David Lynch, I think you could actually argue that his adaptation of Dune was more faithful in terms of just plot points, whereas Denis Villeneuve's Dune movies definitely did change a lot of details from the book. But if we're talking about the themes and like the core message that Frank Herbert was trying to convey in his book, Denis Villeneuve definitely brought that to his movie, where I think David Lynch didn't really bring that into his adaptation. Another example would be Brian De Palma's Scarface. Now, a lot of people prefer the original 1930s Scarface over Brian De Palma's remake, but Brian De Palma's remake brought something completely new to the table, which was the 1980s Miami setting, and just the overall vibe that it has is a completely different movie than the original Scarface. So regardless of which one you think is better or which one you prefer, I think it's safe to say that Brian De Palma brought something completely new to the table, and it actually has a very compelling reason to remake the original. It's not just retreading the same thing, it's bringing something new that makes it worth watching. And then obviously with Wizard of Oz, the 1939 version had Technicolor, and bringing that much color to the screen completely changes the vibe of Wizard of Oz. I don't even think you could really have the Wizard of Oz without the color. I mean, you can go watch the 1925 version, but it just doesn't feel the same. So having Technicolor, just that simple change, pretty much, in my opinion, justifies the 1939 remake in and of itself. But then compare that to a bad movie remake such as Ghostbusters 2016, which was pretty much doomed from the start because they never actually had a plan to bring anything new to the table. They never had a compelling reason to remake the original Ghostbusters movie. The only new thing they brought to the table was they wanted to gender swap the four main characters. And for the record, I am not one of these people who gets easily offended by these sorts of things. I promise you I do not care. I think that whole type of film criticism, if you want to call it that, is really stupid. But when it comes to Ghostbusters 2016, my point here is simply that gender swapping the four main characters is not really that compelling of a reason to remake an original classic movie. You probably need something more than that, and in this case they just didn't have it. So if you don't have a compelling reason to remake a beloved film, then you're probably gonna fail. And number two, I think that a good movie remake has to be a passion project and not a cash grab. And again, using Nosferatu as an example, apparently Robert Eggers has been working on the script for Nosferatu for over a decade, since before he ever became a famous film director. He's always been passionate about Nosferatu. He's always wanted to make a Nosferatu remake. This isn't just some cash grab that he did to make a buck. No, he truly loves Nosferatu, and this has been a dream of his entire life, pretty much. And the same goes for Denis Villeneuve with Dune. Apparently, he has been dreaming about making a Dune adaptation ever since he was a kid. He didn't go into this thinking, oh, well, I'm gonna make my money here, I'm gonna get the bag. No, he's been dreaming about making a Dune adaptation ever since he was a kid, and he finally worked his way up in Hollywood to the point where he actually could make that dream a reality. Now, obviously, it's sometimes difficult to actually know the intentions of a filmmaker. You don't really know if this is a passion project or if they're doing it for the money, but I think most of the time it comes through on the screen. You can kind of just tell. So for example, the live action Lion King remake that came out a few years back, Now, I'm not saying that I know the intentions of all the filmmakers behind that Lion King movie, but I mean, come on. I mean, we all know that that was a cash grab. I think you could pretty much say that about most of these live action Disney remakes. I could be wrong, okay? Maybe these were truly passion projects for the Disney executives who conjured up these ideas, but I mean, like, let's be honest, we all know why these movies were made. It was for the money, and to be fair, they did get their money. Like, The Lion King made an absurd amount of money, but does anyone actually prefer the live action Lion King over the original animated film? And that's what's most likely to happen if you're not truly passionate about the movie you're making. If you're just doing it for the money, chances are it's probably not going to turn out that great. Sometimes I'm sure there's exceptions to that. I'm sure there's been movies that were purely intended to be cash grabs and they turned out really good. But I think most of the time, like, it's just probably not going to end up being that great of a movie. And number 3, this is pretty obvious, but in order for a movie remake to be a good remake, it just has to stand on its own as a good movie, with the caveat that if the original film is really good, in my opinion, that raises the standards for a remake. Like, if the original film is a beloved classic that pretty much everyone loves, well, if you're gonna remake that, then it sure as hell better be a good movie. Otherwise, it's just not going to live up to the expectations, and then you might as well just go watch the original instead. For example, there was that Total Recall remake with Colin Farrell, and yeah, they did bring something new to the table, has a completely different tone to it, but it just kind of fell flat, whereas the original Total Recall movie is just one of the wildest blockbuster movies I've ever seen. It has so much personality to it. The Total Recall remake just does not hold a candle to it, so it's like, okay, why would I ever watch the Total Recall remake when I could just watch the original? And the same goes for Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes. Tim Burton is a pretty good filmmaker. He definitely has a unique style, but yeah, the original Planet of the Apes is one of the best sci-fi movies ever. Whereas Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes remake, while it did have some really impressive makeup and special effects and all that, like, the movie is just a dumpster fire. And even if Tim Burton did have a passion for it, he did have a creative vision to bring something new to the table, it just fell flat because it's just like not a good movie. And there's many other examples, like Spike Lee's Old Boy remake. It's just not a good movie. Just go watch the original Old Boy. So yeah, movie remakes are nothing new in Hollywood. They've been doing it for a minute, and a lot of them have been really great movies. So when I see people say, oh well, like, Hollywood is bankrupt these days because all they do is remakes and it's creatively bankrupt. Well, I mean, Hollywood's always been doing it, and there's nothing inherently wrong with remakes, as long as it brings something new to the table, that it's a passion project and not a cash grab, and it's executed well. And as long as it meets those criteria, remakes are absolutely fine and they can be really great movies.